Hello everyone. As we know, we are going to navigate through the Mumbai University's jurisprudence exam, right? So it is focused more on how the Mumbai University has been setting papers throughout, rather than a general overview of jurisprudence subject. Considering you have only 11 days until your exam, the session is not going to focus more upon the conceptual clarity and everything which you would expect in a jurisprudence session had it been a normal session wherein you do not have any time restraint. So that is why we have four things which we will be focusing on today. First of all, it is the brief overview of the syllabus and the paper pattern according to what is there for your batch, which is going to happen on 12th June. Then the most asked question, that is where to start. In case you have not started yet, which I assume is not the case with everyone, then how to utilize past year papers, because honestly throughout my 5 years of law course, past year papers have been one go-to thing which is held throughout, because that is how you understand what the syllabus, what part of syllabus you can focus on, at least towards the end. Then the length of answers and time allocation during exam. Now this is focused on your 60-mark paper. Earlier we used to have the 100-mark paper which was 3 hours. So for your thing, it's 2 hours, and the answers, I think they have been divided by two. So rather than the 50-mark paper, you have the 60-mark paper and you have 2 hours. So according to that, the length of the answers and time allocation would differ. So let us quickly just go through the syllabus. I'm just rushing through this part because it's not very important, and obviously you have gone through it. I just wanted to show you a few things, and that is why I've just added the syllabus over here. So this is your general introduction as to what is jurisprudence. That is also a very commonly asked questions in 2 markers, and even if nowhere else, you can always add this one line: juris is law, and then prudence is knowledge of law, to any of your 5 marker and 12 marker. So introduction is very, like, basic. Then you have your schools of jurisprudence, which is again a very important topic. All the schools, and then whoever is the pioneer of that particular school, etc. There are a lot. There's a better this thing format given in the new syllabus, which we'll go through shortly. But for now, you have introduction, schools of jurisprudence, and then there is purpose of law, which is also, again, this is not drafted very well. It includes a lot of other things which are not mentioned here. We'll go through that shortly. Now, from fourth module onwards, it's something which I think everybody should focus upon according to the trend which is there in the past year papers. So legislation ho gaya, precedents, customs, juristic writings, all of these topics, there it's going to be there somewhere or the other in the paper. And I assume since the last two batches we had the online papers, our point of reference is going to be the past year papers, which are 2019 backwards basically. So whatever was there before that, even though you have a different paper pattern, the what do you say, the content of the paper pattern might have differed, but the questions and the Roman numbers, all of that is quite similar. So that would be the point of reference, that is 2019 say backwards Ruby papers there. Then you have legal rights. Again, this question has all this portion is something which has been asked quite often, either in situationals or in your 12 markers. Then this person's, all of this is again like from 4 to 10 is something which is there in either it's a 2 marker or a 12 marker, but any one or the other thing from all these things are always there in the paper. Now, recommended readings, the reason I have cancelled all of that, there are 11 days, and nobody expects you to sort of like open a new book and start afresh. You have to stick to your existing books, whatever you have studied so far, or from wherever you have studied so far, whether it is Mokal, Namita, Jhabwala. Jhabwala, again, I'll be very candid. If you are somebody, because jurisprudence is a lighter subject as compared to your other three subjects in this semester. So a lot of times, students, like not students, even what we used to do is we used to focus a little less on jurisprudence because the other subjects required a little more time and effort. So Jhabwala, there's no shame in saying that we're using Jhabwala. And Paranjape is a textbook which I had referred. It was recommended by our teachers back then. So that is also a very good book to understand things which are not clarified in Jhabwala at least. So Paranjape would be one textbook. And if you have been referring this textbook, only then go ahead and refer it now. There is no point in opening this 400-page book 11 days prior to your exam, right? So this was the old syllabus. Now the revised syllabus which has come for the new students, that is from 2022 to 2023, the subjects and the syllabus both have been updated. But what I noticed for jurist students is that they have not updated it as much as they've just made it relevant. So there are a lot of topics which are there in the old syllabus. I mean, the syllabus has not changed, it's just drafted a little in a better manner, and a lot of topics which were missing from the past, the old syllabus, have been included in the new syllabus, which are there in the past year papers. So that is why I have a copy of that open somewhere. I'll just see. This is the new syllabus. See, the main topics remain the same, but they have the subtopics which are more relevant for your according to the past year papers. So there are a lot of things in the old syllabus which are just mentioned for namesake, but they've not even been asked in, say, maybe past 5 years papers. But whatever is mentioned here in this syllabus, this is something which you can use as a point of reference because it has good subtopics. So there, for instance, introduction. So meaning, nature, scope, and importance of jurisprudence. All these things have been asked previously. Nature and definition of law has been asked. Functions, purpose of law, classification of law. Everything which is mentioned here has been asked in the past year papers. And it has a better format to say that, for instance, if you have sources of law, they have mentioned that, I think this was one of the 12 markers also, that what are formal and material sources of law, and then what is custom. So this is very relevant to the past year papers. And then they have given the subtopics कि custom के अंदर क्या है, what are the kinds of custom, essential conditions of validity of custom. So whatever questions, at least in past 3 year papers, were there as per I think 2019 to 2017, the custom part was more or less only this. There was nothing new asked apart from this. So I found this syllabus a little more relevant and better drafted. Precedent, all of these questions have been asked in the past year papers. Legislation, then School of Jurisprudence, I would suggest, see, baki sab ke liye you can refer the old syllabus, but School of Jurisprudence, you should go through this because this has all the subtopics given in a very precise manner. So when you have natural law school, you have basic tenets of natural law. All of these are more like, the 12 markers or the short notes. So it has proper bifurcation, which you can also find in the index of Jhabwal, I think. So you have legal positivism. So here you will find all the main aspects or the main questions which can be asked from legal positivism. And this pure theory of law is also a past year question. Then Austin's imperative theory, this is also a past year question. If not a 12 marker, it's always there in a 5 marker, the short notes. Then historical school of law, these two things are important and it's mentioned over here, which is missing in the old syllabus. Then sociological school of law, these two parts are important. Rights and duties also, this is there in the old syllabus as well, but again, better manner of putting it out. Persons, legal status of animal. So see, this was missing in the past year paper, but this is one of your situationals now. So a little more relevant. The syllabus has not changed, but it's just more relevant to the past year papers. Property, possession, ownership, and the last topic would be your obligation. So this is in general what all topics are there. And as I said, as per your previous old syllabus, the things which we can focus upon is 4 to 10 modules. Before that, it is introduction and everything, which is also very important. But if there are things which are short asked, that's 4 to 10, and use it as a point of reference, the new syllabus. Don't go ahead and just completely forget about what is mentioned in your actual syllabus, because that is, I think you all are the last batch which would be referring to that syllabus. So this was the paper pattern, and this is something which we did not have, but you guys have. So I had just gone through it once. You have 2 out of 4. We had 4 out of 6. So you are basically attempting 2 answers each in all the Roman numbers except the 2 markers, which is also 6 out of 10. The plus point over here is you have options in your 2 markers, which was not the case earlier. So the paper pattern is comparatively, it's not, if not easy, it's not even difficult as compared to the old paper. And you can refer to the old past year papers to prepare for this paper. Considering the paper pattern, the Roman numbers are the same, only the options are something which have changed, right? So this was your paper pattern, and based on this, we would be moving ahead. So where to begin is one of the most common questions, especially in subjects like sociology and jurisprudence, wherein the subject is very vast. And it's not that it's difficult, but it's just that it's very vast and it's very difficult to memorize things, right? So there are, this is very suggestive. These are the things which worked for me and for the people I know. It's not necessary you have to follow the same thing. This is just a sort of like, things which have worked for us. So that is what we are sharing ahead. So this is one thing, textbook guide you have been using. Again, as I already told you, do not go ahead and buy new books at this time. Whatever books you have, whatever you've gone through even once roughly, stick to those books. There is no point in, going just because I said Paranjape is a good textbook. Today you go and open Paranjape, you won't understand anything unless that is the book which you have been referring during lectures, or at least from past one month, right? And it could be any other textbook also. I think there's AK Jain. There are a lot of textbooks for jurisprudence. What I found easier to understand was Paranjape and obviously Jhabwala. So textbook guide, whatever you have been using, that is one thing. Stick to one book. Don't go ahead and get 2-3 books. You will get confused. One book is enough for this subject. Then past 5-year question papers. And when I say past 5-year question papers, it's not only 5 question papers. It will include KT papers that would make the papers double. So if you have past 5-year papers, you would actually be having 10 papers which you can refer to. And KT papers are something which you should not miss because they are basically the same as the regular papers. There's no difference as such. So it's a good point of reference even if they are KT papers. And you would easily find the paper. See, 5 years is an ideal thing. If you have very less time, go ahead with 3 years and you will have 6 papers. And if you have been doing this, so if you have time, then go behind. Like we used to target for past 10 years and then whatever we could do, but minimum would be 5 years, at least for subjects wherein their questions are repetitive. Jurisprudence has fairly repetitive questions, at least for the papers which have been happening so far. Then pen and notebook, very common. I'll tell you how to go ahead with this. So start where you are. First of all, read the questions from past year papers before you begin. Now, obviously, you would say that you don't know the content. What is the point of reading the questions, right? This is something which is also which you can also use during your exam. It is always better to just browse through roughly all the questions before you start attempting your paper. Why? Because subconsciously, at least if you know the answers, in your head, you have already started thinking about those things. At least it has passed through your mind that, okay, this is something which is going to come ahead. Similarly, when you prepare for the paper, if you have gone through the past year papers, you won't be lost in your guide or in your textbook, because you would, if you come across maybe to the topic customs, you will remember that ye 2 marker mein bhi aaya tha. You will remember that there was a situational which was similar to this topic. You would at least have a rough idea ki yaar ye important to hai. So accordingly, your brain will start processing, it that way, that this is something which is important. I've gone through it. A lot of topics you would find that yaar ye to pucha hi nahi tha. So if you have less time, you might want to focus, or you might want to put that time towards other topics. So once that has gone through roughly, once you've gone through the questions, it makes you understand the subject a little better. Then browse through your textbook guide cover to cover. Now I don't mean go and read each and every word cover to cover. What I mean is, once you have gone through a textbook or a guide roughly, at least you would know where to find stuff, right? So if the past year paper says custom, now if you're going to spend, if you don't know where custom is in this textbook, then it would be very you would be spending a lot of time in just figuring where things are, and that breaks your momentum. So once you have just roughly gone through the book, maybe even just the index, so you have an idea ki yaar ye to hai textbook mein, or you would know ye nahi hai, so you know that you have to refer to another book or another thing to go through that concept, right? So basically, even for the open book exams, right? So it's not the case the open book exam hai, like how AIBE is. So it's not the case that everybody would be finding the paper very similar, because a lot of people would know कि यार ये section IPC में है और कहाँ है. At least इतना पता होगा कि ये 100 to 200 के बीच में, 200 to 300 के बीच में. For these people, the paper is going to be comparatively easier and less time consuming as compared to a person who's just opening the book on the same day, right? Because you are spending maximum or at least majority of your time just figuring out यार ये है कहाँ पे. So once you know roughly कि ये चीज कहाँ पर है, it becomes easier to use it as your point of reference and come back back to it whenever required. So that is why these are the two things which you should do before starting. It can be vice versa. You can start with your textbook and then past year papers, but I would suggest past year papers first, because in you would know what are the important topics. Then start with 2 markers. Okay, so this is something which I have been following since semester 2, and it has worked very well. And the reason it worked very well for us was because we did not have options for 2 markers. We had options for all the other things. So it was basically, if I do not know a 2 marker, there is nothing which can be done. I would just be losing my marks straight away. And that is how I had started with 2 markers. It was not with the intention of covering the syllabus, but just the very fact that there are no options for the same. But when I started solving the 2 markers, or at least going through it and then finding it in my book, it was easier to do all the other Roman numbers. Because if, for instance, your 2 marker is what is custom or something similar to that, when I am opening my book for finding this specific answer, I would come across all the other things in relation to custom which would be there, or which would be useful for a short note or for a situational or a 12 marker for that case. So even while you do this, ek baar browse kar liya, obviously you won't after you've browsed your textbook, you won't remember everything like that well, because you have just gone through it. You're not reading each and every word. But when you're solving your 2 markers, you have to go and you have to find where this particular topic is, and you have to make you have to at least read. If you're not writing, you have to read the content that in relation to a 2 marker. So once you are solving all the 2 markers, even though it won't be topic wise, it's going to be random because it's a past year paper, but it would give you a very exhaustive idea of where things are and what all things should be included. So any 2 marker can easily be an introduction for a 12 marker. So that is how it helps you, and that is the easiest place to start, because you won't get intimidated by ye kitna bada hai, isme 4 page likhna hai, what all content do I need to add. And when you come back for a 12 marker, you would at least have a sense of the topic kya hai, and it would be easier to read the rest and then make an answer for a 12 marker or a short note. So the past year papers which we are referring for this session is November 2019 and May 2019. I do have papers, but I think these two would be enough, and if the time permits, we'll just go through them shortly. Now, the Roman number which I would be focusing upon for the 2 papers is always going to be Roman number 1. At least for us, it was Roman number 1, that is 2 markers, because that is how you can start studying. So don't focus on solving the paper, use it to cover your syllabus. Because see, right now in 1 hour, how much can we solve, right? How much can we go through the kitna hi concept pad loge, ya to aata hai ya to nahi aata hai, right? So what we are going to syllabus rather than covering a syllabus, because if you sit and start solving each question, ये 2 marker है तो इसका आंसर क्या होगा, ये सिचुएशन है इसका आंसर क्या होगा, it's you're not going to complete this in 1 hour at least, right? So we are going to focus on how to use your past year papers and cover your syllabus. So this is the past year paper from Mokal. This is your 2019 November paper. This was the KT paper, if I know. So this is the C. What is custom? yahi par aa gaya. We were just discussing about this. So what is custom is something which is a very important, like customs ka jo bhi in relation to custom, whatever is there and whatever is there in relation to moral rights, legal rights, ye sari cheezein काफी important hai. It is going to come either in 2 markers or situations or 12 markers. So there's no going away with this. So now, when I tell you what is custom, instead of teaching you कि भाई custom क्या है, what I would like you to do is, if you have your books, okay, so if you're referring to Jhabwala, go ahead and open Jhabwala. If you are referring to Mokal, you can go through the previous this thing where the custom topic is there. Or if you're referring to any textbook, go through the custom topic. So now, if my aim is to basically solve the question what is custom, and that is for 2 marks, what I would be doing is I would go and first find ki bhai custom hai ka. I am referring to Jhabwala for now, so because I think this is something which everybody knows and not Paranjape. Custom. See, abhi to OCR hai, you can go ahead and find your this thing. But earlier when we did not have the scanned copies, you had to go and see कि कौन सी topic कहाँ है. And that would still be better, I think, because ये तो अभी कर लोगे कि भाई custom कहाँ पे है, and you went ahead and you just okay 111 page पे है. This is easy, but this is not going to be something which will help you memorize. See, this is custom. Now, when I'm trying to solve this 2 marker, where does it start? Requisite of a valid local custom. This is the topic. It starts from your chapter 8. Okay. So now when I'm solving the 2 marker, I have come back to this topic. I have gone through my Jhabwala मान सब मुझे पता है custom कहाँ पर है. At least I know कि भाई ये है syllabus में, right? Now when I come for a 2 marker, what I would be seeing is okay यहाँ पे तो already दिया हुआ है. You will go ahead, you'll see all the past year papers also, which is again an additional benefit because you would know कि यार ये topic में से और क्या क्या आ सकता है. Now it says define custom यहाँ पे है. So it does not mean I will only come and read only this part. I will go through the topic roughly. I will pick out the points which I feel is important for a 2 marker. See, even though it's only a 2 marker, understand it is very easy to lose marks over here because either you will get good marks or you will not. Same for situationals. And it is always better to solve additional questions for your 2 markers and situationals because you have options for both. So if you have extra time and if you have rechecked your paper, always better to solve one additional question because यहाँ पे 12 मार्कर और 5 मार्कर में एटलीस्ट स्कोप रहता है कुछ तो सही लिखा होगा अगर सही नहीं भी है तो बट 2 marker and situational either it is right or wrong, as simple as that. So now when we are going through custom, I will be reading this topic कि भाई अच्छा क्या है इसमें for the 2 marker, then I will be coming across this kind of customs. So at least it has gone, at least I've gone through कि अच्छा custom के topic में kind of custom भी है. So अब आगे जाके when there's a question on local custom for example, so at least I know कि okay this comes under legal this thing. So it's not the case कि 2 marker आप जाके देखकर you will just solve that and then you'll leave it. That's not how we are going through this. How we are using the 2 marker is to understand the कौन से topics previously पूछे गए हैं and based on that we are going ahead and trying to understand कि what all topics can be asked again. Now when we are referring to Jhabwala, you would see how many past year questions have already been asked here, right? There are so many questions 2019 2018 कितनी बार पूछा गया है. So एक तो ये भी हो गया and even if not that, even if you're referring to the past year papers alone, at least you would know okay these are the important topics which are there in custom. And I would suggest you to have a hard copy of your past year papers. It is very difficult to navigate through your phone or screen when you're referring to those. It is always better to have your hard copy, and when you are done just the old way, just start ticking कि भाई ये हो गया है, ये Roman number हो गया है, and that would give you a sense of your actual paper also because now you're not going ahead with the online system, right? So you have to sort of move from online world to the offline world now, which I think you all have already done in your past semesters. So देखो जैसे ये custom हो गया, then this is legal and conventional custom usage. All of these are the topics which I would just go ahead and see okay now then I came across this new word, this legal maxim. So now so according to me, if I have gone through this, I would stop here and I'm saying this is something which looks new. What is this? So these are the few topics I would go through. Then judicial recognition of custom. यहाँ पे पूछा गया है what is the essentials of valid custom. This is again a new topic. So when I am attempting these 2 markers, I am also going through all these questions which are going to be asked maybe in a short note or a 12 marker, right? So ये हो गया. Then I have gone through what are the valid points. Then this seems something which is not English. So I feel in jurisprudence and iOS both, it is always better to at least know the meaning of these things. क्योंकि अगर ये आ गया, ठीक है, अब चलो, I'm not sure whether this has come in the past year papers, but there are other legal Latin maxims which have come. So what happens is this: you might know this answer, but you don't know translation क्या है, and according to that, what you have to write. So maybe is meant ethical conviction on part of those who follow blah blah blah. So you might be knowing all this, but if you don't know कि भाई इसका meaning क्या है, how are you going to attempt the paper, right? So these are the few things which you can focus on when you are going through the questions कि at least translation पता हो कि what does it translate to. And obviously whenever you have questions which are in another language, usually Latin, you have to give them a translation. Jurisprudence ka you have to remember juris is law and then knowledge of law. So prudence is knowledge. So this is 1-2 things where you can, if you think yaar ye iska length answer ka sahi nahi aa raha hai, I'm not remembering this very well, it is always better to add few things here and there, and the most common things would be which are general to your subject, right? So jurisprudence का जो translation है वो डाल दिया. अब customs में अगर और कुछ याद नहीं आ रहा है, even if you're not remembering this word, it is always better to just stick to English if you don't know these words, because rather than writing it wrong, it's better to just stick to what you know. So ethical convection, iske badle, even if you write ethical convection while writing a 12 marker, that is fine. Don't go ahead and write wrong this thing because the meaning changes accordingly. Then ye ho gaya custom ka ho gaya samjho topic. Theories of customary law. Then you would come across this theories. So basically what happens when you attempt a 2 marker is that you are coming back to your textbook and you are going through that topic once, and that is not only going to be from the point of view of a 2 marker but in general कि अगर ये 5 mark में भी आ गया 12 mark के लिए भी आ गया, at least you would know where to find things. Now once you have gone through this for the point of view of 2 marker, now if I ask you for a 5 marker maybe that what are the valid essentials, so at least you would know कि भाई ये यहाँ पे तो है. So yeah, so at least you would know कि okay this topic is there valid, क्योंकि ये सब इसमें तो आएगा नहीं, ये इंडेक्स में तो इतना डिटेल में नहीं देते कि दैट यू नो रीजनेबल इज वन ऑफ द दिस थिंग. सो इफ इट कम्स इन अ पेपर एटलीस्ट यू वुड नो कि वापस कहाँ आके क्या ढूंढना है. सो दैट वुड बी योर एंटायर कस्टम का टॉपिक. सो फ्रॉम अ 2 marker you have gone through what are the kinds of custom, you have gone through local custom क्या होता है, legal custom क्या होता है. Then you would at least know कि अगर सिर्फ लीगल कस्टम का क्वेश्चन आया है, instead of just explaining this, had you not gone through this entire thing, what you would have attempted, any person would just say कि ये force of law है, irrespective and agreement on part of those blah blah blah, ये हो गया, इतना खत्म हो जाता है 2 marker. Even for this you would probably get 1.5 marks, but for this additional line कि ये कौन से 2 टाइप के होते हैं, for this additional word कि conventional custom में तुमने डारा है कि इसको usage बोलते हैं, right? Or usage, this is the another word which is used for that. So maybe you know कि conventional custom क्या होता है, but you did not know कि इसको usage भी बोलते हैं. So again, that you know these are the things which you would remember if you have come through and looked for the answer over here. So this is one additional thing you would be adding to your 2 marker कि भाई ये custom ये है, customs are of 2 kind. अपने को legal custom नहीं पूछा था, the question was customs. So what you would ideally add for a 2 marker here would be कि custom होता क्या है, ठीक है, where is the main topic, okay, one of the most fruitful sources of law. अभी ये सब चीजें जैसे fruitful sources of law है, you can add this where in your 5 marker and 12 marker where you require length. If you add this in 2 markers, fruitful है ये है वो, it would look like कि भाई आता नहीं है, बस in general डाल दिया. हमको पता है sources of law है, but this is not something which you would focus on for a 2 marker. So you would probably go for you know a definition given by any of the jurists, or you can once एक बता दे कि custom plays a more important role in Indian system rather than this is also not important for a 2 marker. In general you just mentioned कि custom होता क्या है, and that is one of the sources of law. You went ahead and then you you said that कि kinds of custom होते हैं. Custom has been divided in 2 broad things. First is legal and conventional. ठीक है, this would be your second sentence. Then lastly, legal custom is further classified into general and local custom. So this would be a sufficient answer for a 2 marker. So rather than focusing on the length, just because I have added 5 sentences does not mean I know the topic well. But if I've added 3 sentences which make sense, which at least which the examiner knows कि भाई इसको पता है कि custom कैसे classify किया गया है, और custom के अंदर again there is legal custom and how that has been classified, that is enough for a 2 marker, right? And you have options in your 2 markers. So again that, and then let's go to the next question. So ownership ho gaya, for instance. So ownership, see, let's go through that now. Ownership again is a very important topic, 145. So ownership mein you will find a lot of topics which are common to other subjects, but again you have to go through it once because this is more from jurisprudence and theoretical point of view. See, now when we are going for the 2 marker ownership, either you can just like you know browse through के ये definition है. It's always, see, if you remember any jurist's name and you can you like you know quote them, that is always something which is going to be better than a general definition. एक line हो गया कि ownership ये होता है, and if you remember maybe it's not necessary कि भाई Salmon का इतना बड़ा है इसी को याद रखना है. You can go for a shorter this thing, then maybe Austin's definition. Ownership is a right over a determinate thing, indefinite is a point of view, blah blah blah. And if you इसके अलावा कुछ नहीं आ रहा है, ठीक है, ये definition ऐसे याद आ रहा है, और you can also you know put it in passive because it's very difficult to remember everything word by word. So you can put it in like you know what you understand out of it in the next line. So basically what Austin is trying to say, this could be a part of a 5 marker, not a 2 marker, right? For French code, this is again one of the things which you can add in your 5 marker or a 12 marker, because this would again say कि ठीक है, this is something other than a general answer of a ownership, right? So French code mein ye, if you remember, these are few additional points, because otherwise ownership mein you would just be writing till your and ki theek hai definition ho gaya, right? So what you can do for a 2 marker is ki ownership ka ek definition de diya and then one definition by any of the jurists. In case you don't remember any of this, then you can go ahead and then just mention few characteristics of incidents of ownership. Basically, do not leave the question unattempted. It's always better to have 2 half attempted questions rather than a 1 unattempted question, based on what options you have, right? Because agar likha hi nahi hai, there's no scope of getting marks. If you've written half answers, at least there's scope. The teacher might have like ki theek hai, this makes sense, give you marks. But it's always better to have the question attempted. So attempted जैसे भी ownership का हो गया, we went through the definition. We will follow the similar pattern which we followed for custom. ठीक है, custom के लिए जैसे पढ़ा था वैसे ही similarly ownership you will go through कि ठीक है इसके definitions दिए हुए हैं. The first thing which stuck my mind क्योंकि salmond is an important thing in jurisprudence. इसका पढ़ लेते हैं because यहाँ पे rights and rem आ गया, important concepts आ गए, ये सब जो भी है, it's not necessary कि 2 marker में ही डालना है. This will also help you in a 12 marker and a 5 marker. So again, as I said, we are not solving the paper, right? So 2 marker ke liye, I won't just go ahead and study 2 marker. You have to use that past year paper and try to cover your syllabus accordingly. और जब 2 markers से start करते हैं, what happens is because 2 markers have very less scope, right? कितना ही पूछ लेंगे. Custom पूछा तो उन्होंने क्या पूछा? What is custom? So what happens is it will be important, sort of picked topics which are important in general. So जब custom के लिए गए, we found so many questions which could have been asked in a 12 mark or a 5 marker. Similarly, the same thing is going to happen with ownership. Then again, when I came for a 2 marker, I found out कि भाई ये तो 12 marker या 5 marker में already पूछा है, concept and essentials of ownership. So you can briefly just go through it. Maybe when you are attempting the 2 marker, you do not have the time to go through the entire thing and learn it. But what you can do is highlight the points. अब illustration थोड़े time के लिए छोड़ सकते हैं. What you can do is कि okay, 6 essential characteristics है अगर, so we know that we either have a 12 marker or a 5 marker. So at least minimum 4 तो अपन पढ़ के आगे बढ़ सकते हैं. The owner has the right to possess the thing which he owns. Generally, the owner has the right to use and enjoy the thing owned. Yeah, although and everything, you can leave it for the time when you come back to this topic for a 12 marker. Right now, we are only going through the 2 marker and understanding कि भाई syllabus में properly क्या क्या है. Then the owner has the right to exhaust the thing while using it. ये जो first sentences है, just to get a sort of brief overview कि इसमें क्या क्या आ सकता है. So sometimes what used to happen, that once we have solved the entire 2 markers, at least how I was preparing the paper for the paper back then, there might be instances wherein I did not have the time to go through the 12 marker questions in in a very exhaustive manner, because obviously 4 papers होते, it's very difficult to go through everything. But for instance, मैंने ये सिर्फ when I was preparing for the 2 marker, and it's easy to solve your 2 markers, right? कितने questions हो जाएंगे, कितने तो repeat हो जाएंगे. You have 10 questions in each paper. For 1 year, you would have 20 questions. उसमें से भी काफी repeat हो गए. So once I had gone through, for example, I'm not saying this has happened, I'm just saying, for example, ownership के लिए I had gone through for the 2 marker. I had just read these 4 things. 8 important topics है. Owner has the right to destroy or alienate thing. Another ये सब छोड़ दो. 4 हम लोग ने, because at that point I was only attempting a 2 marker, right now what we are doing is we are attempting the 2 marker. So 2 marker के लिए I had just gone through, समझो ये 4 चीजें. Now what happened, maybe I did not have the time to go through it as a 12 marker, and this comes in the paper and I don't know anything else. So at least what you would know कि ठीक है ये तो कहीं पढ़ा था, ये 4 चीजें, and then you can sort of like add on to it. One more important thing for your contract and jurisprudence paper is you can always add your own illustrations. अगर मुझे ये नहीं भी याद है कि भाई ये illustration क्या है, I can just make up my things like A and B डाल दो, A B X Y Z, just make up stuff. If you for instance और कुछ आता नहीं है, ये 12 marker आ गया है and we only remember the first 4 lines, 1 2 3 4. So what you can do is ये points तो याद है, ये आ गया, इसके बाद now then you apply your mind in case you have not gone through everything else. You know that jurisprudence में you can always add your illustrations. So what you can do is ये एक topic हो गया, उसको थोड़ा ये कर दिया. Transfer of property में कहीं ना कहीं पढ़ा होगा possession के बारे में, you elaborated 1 line on that. Then there is more space to fill because obviously 12 marker है तो at least 3.5 to 4 sides, so one tries to attempt, and especially if you have like only 2 12 markers as per your paper pattern, so you would try to fill in the pages, right? तो अगर कुछ भी नहीं आया, एटलीस्ट मेक अप सम इलस्ट्रेशन, एटलीस्ट यू नो कि भाई ये इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है, बिकॉज ऑब्वियसली द person who's checking your paper, they obviously don't have the time to go through it word by word, but at least while going through your paper ऐसे लगना चाहिए कि भाई इसको पता है कि what the person is trying to say. It's not that the person is just sort of like, you know, if you have not gone through this, what are you going to do? You are just going to like sort of like, you know, try to कुछ भी लिख दो, ownership का है, you would use your mind, obviously that's not going to be wrong, but an easy thing would be कि भाई at least ये 4 line तो याद है. You can at least have a sort of like, you know, what can you say, you can say at least skeleton पता हो, so you can fill in stuff accordingly. At least at that point your structure of the answer is not going to look like कि भाई इसको नहीं आता है answer. So that is how, like, you know, when you go for a 2 marker, you go through these topics and it helps you for the other thing. Then ownership and possession and encumbrance. So अब ये सब topics यहाँ पे नहीं लिखा है कि ये पहले पूछा गया, so maybe while trying to solve the 2 markers I can just skip through it, that is fine. अब सब्जेक्ट मैटर 2004 में पूछा है, if I don't have the time I just browse through it, but पता है कि यहाँ पे है एक topic which is subject matter of the ownership, and in future if I come for a past year paper जहाँ पे लिखा है, at least I know कि वापस कहाँ पे आके इसको ढूंढना है. So at least go through your subtopics. Now this is important, even though यहाँ पे mention नहीं किया है past year paper, हाँ दिया है. Introduction है इसीलिए it's not mentioned here. See, this has been asked many times. Last paper tak this was asked, what are trusts and everything. So now when you have come for ownership, always मतलब जैसे ये किया था कि 4 essential पढ़ लिए ऊपर से roughly. कॉर्पोरेट एंड कॉर्पोरेट ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. इफ यू अगर सी दिस इज व्हाई इट इज इंपॉर्टेंट टू स्टार्ट विथ योर पास्ट ईयर पेपर्स फर्स्ट. अगर तुमने पास्ट ईयर पेपर्स ऑलरेडी इफ यू हैव गॉन थ्रू 5 पेपर्स, यू वुड नो कि भाई ये तो पूछा गया है बहुत बार, एंड दैट इज व्हाई जैसे इसके लिए किया था कि चलो बाद में पढ़ लेंगे सब्जेक्ट मैटर थोड़ा, दैट यू वोंट डू फॉर दिस टॉपिक. यू वुड कम एंड यू वुड अच्छा ये बहुत बार पूछा था, एक बार इसको एटलीस्ट लेट्स जस्ट रीड थ्रू इट वंस, राइट? So then you went through this, ये सब हो गया. And यहाँ पे जाप वाला में obviously an additional advantage कि यहीं पे पता चल जाएगा कि past year papers है. But again यहाँ पे बहुत like a lot of times, you know what used to happen. So for example यहाँ पे 2004 दिया हुआ है. So in general like I'm not sure whether it has been updated now, but a lot of times even though it has been asked in the past recent papers, यहाँ पे update करना रह जाता है. So I might just go through it and say कि ये तो 2004 में पूछा था, important नहीं है, आगे बढ़ गए. But ये पूछा गया होगा in 2018-19 somewhere or the other. So for that thing, not for you to avoid this thing, it is always better कि you go through your past year papers. They are not responsible for like, you know, whether we have cross checked or not. We always have to cross check कि भाई ये topic important है कि नहीं. And that is why if you have gone through the past year papers once, you would know, because ये तो इतनी बार है ना, इसमें आ जाएगा 12 marker में आ जाएगा, maybe a situational. So if you have gone through this thing, you would come and you would wait, ठीक है ये तो important है, एक बार पढ़ लेते हैं. Trust is again very important. ये 2019 में 2 marker भी था, and then the online paper which we had, we did not have the same paper pattern, but the 3 markers you can compare it to something in between 2 and like your 2 markers and a short note, right? तो वो topic तो important है ही. फिर ये भी see duplicate ownership. This was something which was asked to us. Now obviously I don't expect कि similar चीजें पूछी जाए अभी भी, because it is always better to refer to your 2019 से पहले वाले papers as compared to your, you know, the online MCQs and everything. Obviously if you have them, you should go through them. Topics are important, but what had happened at that time is everybody knew कि ये online paper है, so the teachers were also sort of setting the paper in a manner to test your applicability, that is just like, you know, whether you remember it or not, because obviously a lot of cheating used to happen at that time, if I may say so. So application was checked, and that is why a lot of times, you know, what used to happen, for instance duplicate ownership दिया हुआ है यहाँ पे, ठीक है, trust ownership is an instance of duplicate ownership. So you need to remember कि भाई ये trust के अंदर आता है. So you might अब ना for somebody who has just gone through normal के trust क्या होता है, ये क्या होता है, I would have just gone कि ठीक है trust ही होता है. But अगर ये पूछ लिया कि duplicate ownership का, or if it is there in a situational, so even though you know the answer, you do not know कि ये इसके अंदर आता है, and that is why maybe you lost on it, right? So that is why when you browse through it for your 2 marker, mark these things कि ठीक है अगर ये डुप्लीकेट ओनरशिप वर्ड आया, एटलीस्ट यू नो कि ये इसके डायरेक्शन में सोचना है. मे बी द क्वेश्चन वुड हैव बीन समथिंग एल्स, बट एटलीस्ट यू वुड नो कि वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट ट्रस्ट एंड बेनिफिशियल ओनरशिप, राइट? So then you went through this again. This is important, trust and bailment. If you remember the definition of anybody who's given it, good. Otherwise, it is always better to just stick to your understanding rather than giving a wrong definition. Then trust and executor, ये नहीं, trust in contract, okay, this you can attempt because you have studied contract, or you agency, and I think again this is going to be in the same semester contract too. So these are few common topics which you can afford to just like browse through rather than sitting and studying each of the topics. अब ये हो गया. Then again, so now you came across this part, ठीक है, जब हम लोग ownership का पढ़ रहे थे, and then we came across this aspect. So now this seems important because this is a distinguish between, and even if you just read it once, at least it would register in your mind कि ठीक है main distinguish क्या है. So in case this comes, and it's easier to understand also, right, because it's given in a table format. So if I were you, I would just go through कि ठीक है चलो एक table दिया हुआ है, and these are the two important topics. So even if the distinguish between does not come in, ठीक है, you can always use one part as an answer. So अगर सिर्फ trust पूछा है, then you can only stick to 1 to 5 points of trust. अगर agency पूछा है, you can stick to 1 to 5 points of agency. But if there's a distinguish in between, and if you've read it even once, it would help you to distinguish between, because maybe a lot of times you might know both the topics very well, लेकिन जब distinguish between का question आ गया, you are not able to relate कि कौन से point के सामने कौन सा point आएगा, right? So this is one way to attempt your distinguish and like differentiate between वाला question. If it's a 12 marker, you can either like make these columns, or what you can do is make pointers. अब जैसे कि one डाला है, whatever way you number your answers, ठीक है. So if you put trust, so you पहले एक line आ जाएगा trust के बारे में, ठीक है. Whereas then your second sentence will start with whereas, comma, and then agency. Again similar, and then you have to sort of make it look like ठीक है ये एक एक part है. It's not going to look like a very continuous answer. It's going to be sort of like ये एक paragraph हुआ. This was one point of difference, and then this is another paragraph. Similarly, even if you are attempting it in like this half and half page, if you have space on your paper, then this is also a better way to go ahead with it, provided you know your this thing very well. अगर तुमको पता है कि इसके सामने यही आने वाला है, and if you are sure कि okay I will be able to attempt this question without there being a very evident like if evidently यहाँ का point यहाँ से match नहीं कर रहा है, it is always better to go back to that format wherein you write whereas, because at least evidently वो contradict नहीं कर देगा. It will be something similar obviously, but if you put it this way, and if you are not very sure of इसका opposite क्या होगा, it becomes very evident, and rather than like being a plus point, it becomes a minus point. ये गलत लिखा है. So depending on like where you stand on that particular topic, go ahead and attempt your distinguish between that way. Then you would come across trust, mortgage. This is again important. Vested and contingent ownership. Okay, so we are not sort of like we're not solving the paper, we're not trying to understand कि भाई vested interest क्या होता है. What we are doing over here is we are referring to the past year papers, and we are trying to cover the syllabus. Now obviously when you do it, you won't be doing it within 1 hour, so that is why you would be having enough time to go through these topics in a better manner. I am just like sort of browsing through it कि ठीक है ये आया तो what are you going to study from this, right? So vested interest हो गया. When I've come here, I know contingent ownership is important, vested interest is important. So I've gone through this topic. Maybe contingent interest हो गया. फिर यहाँ पे see, again, if I have come here for a 2 marker, I might not have the time to go through itna sab itna in detail. What I would do is keep all of this for a later time wherein I would be solving my 12 markers. What I would be doing is I would just read this. क्योंकि इसमें क्या हो जाएगा, once you are reading the distinction between, even if it's coming as a separate topic, you still know the content for this topic, and it's probably going to be the important aspects only, because they won't put it otherwise in the distinguish between, right? So ये 5 points भी अगर पढ़ के आगे बढ़ गए for this stage, it is enough. Then if it comes for a 12 marker and you went through the past year papers कि ठीक है vested interest क्या है, ये क्या है, then you can go ahead and read all this again at that time. Right now we are just focusing on how to browse through your Jhabwala with your past year papers, right? So then again, transfer. Now if you must have noticed अभी तक हम लोग ने सिर्फ 2 questions attempt किए, but there are so many portions which we have gone through. Now at least we know कि भाई ownership के अंदर ये condition precedent and condition subsequent आता है. This is again an important topic कि हम लोग को distinguish between में पूछा गया था precedent and subsequent. So here, because it was an easy topic and it is easy to distinguish between, you can go ahead with the table format. There is no this thing has to, or otherwise see the better way would be for things which are like only presentation wise, जैसे कि distinguish between को कैसे attempt करना है. or the answers for a situation. I would suggest it's better to ask your professors in your college, because correct me if I'm wrong, but semester 8 is something wherein your papers are checked internally. So even though there is no right or wrong way, right? इस table में भी लिखोगे, it is fine. Even if you write in paragraph form, it is right. It is fine, right? So, but if you know the preference of the person who's teaching you, which might probably be the person who's also checking your paper, then you stick to that. There is no, it's not ki right or wrong, it's just ki theek hai, if I am a professor, if I feel कि मुझे डिस्टिंग्विश बिटवीन चेक करने में टेबल फॉर्मेट ज्यादा सही लगता है, एंड इफ यू नो दैट आई एम द वन चेकिंग योर पेपर, even though your content is not changing, you might just stick to this format, right? So all these minute things, it is always better to, like, if you have the time, if you have revision lectures, these are few things which you can ask for your professors कि ये answer कैसे attempt करना चाहिए. Even situational, so a lot of times, what used to happen when we used to solve the situations with the professors, a lot of times, even though we have maybe you have two professors for the same subject, so you might have different opinion over there ki ye situational ka answer kya hai, Mopal might say something. So always better to, if you know, see, I'm not saying you should go and pester your teachers ki jo paper check kar rahe, but if you know that this is the person who, they are not setting the paper but they are checking the paper, right? So if you know okay, this person is going to be able to give me a better idea as per my college. So maybe JCCL has a format which should be followed for situational, and GLC and PGCL have a separate format. It's not the case कि कौन सा सही कौन सा गलत है. It is also, this is the preference of the person who's checking the paper. As simple as that. That if I feel कि this is there in my subconscious mind, if somebody has solved this, I feel उसको सही से आता है, इसीलिए उसने ऐसे solve किया है. So if you are able to find out these things beforehand, always better to do that. Another thing would be, see, since we are discussing about the examiner, what I had followed for my constitutional law paper was I had just attempted 1 12 marker first, like okay, 2 3 12 markers solved kiye the, but I had just asked my teacher, requested her to just check the question, like answer, and let me know ki isme kya kya add kar sakte. I am not saying you can go ahead with the entire thing of it and say, like, pester them for that. You can just solve 2 3 important questions which are repetitive, and you can ask them, okay, can you mark me for that? Can you just tell me then what more can I add? So for constitutional law, the things which she had suggested, if I remember well, was maybe add more case laws, or if there's a landmark case, focus more on that case and less on the other content. So this is something which was subjective to my professors in my college. It might differ in your college. So these few things, if you have revision lectures, or if you are able to connect with your teacher, these are the few things which you can ask them to cover कि भाई situational वाला ये वाला हमको समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, there is right and wrong, like it could either be this or that. It's not the case कि ये गलत है या ये सही है. So what is the thing which she suggests? Because obviously I'm not saying कि it's correct, but I found it easier to go that way rather than just using your spending time over there, because obviously in 11 days you don't have the time to भाई ये book में से भी check कर लो, वो book में से भी check कर लो. So it is always better if you are able to find out that way. I would suggest to do it that way, at least for situations. And then kinds of cooperation, score cooperation आगे. This is easy. So again, I would just like show it to you once. इसमें aggregative thinking, I think that will become faster. Corporate soul, corporate aggregate. इसमें situational आया था, if I remember. See, cooperation. Situational आया था कि this is given. I think they had given कि these are the few things. Tell me whether it is corporation aggregate or corporation soul. So even if I have not solved the situationals, and if I have gone through the topic of corporation for a 2 marker, and I have read this, the corporation are of 2 kinds, aggregate and soul. So I at least would know कि भाई इसके अंदर क्या है और इसके अंदर क्या है. Based on this, I can attempt the situational, because rather than like solving each question, which you might not have the time to do, it is always better to have your conceptual clarity on the topic, and then you can just go with your luck कि भाई आ गया तो ठीक है, नहीं आया तो you have other options to attempt, right? So now cooperation, when we went for the cooperation soul and aggregate for a 2 marker, we know that this topic is important. It's situational, maybe aaya hai, maybe for a short note. So what you can do is you can spend some time over here. Even though you have come to this page for a 2 marker, you can go through and corporate aggregate क्या होता है समझ लो कि क्या है. Example दिया हुआ है. then you can just basically sort of understand what is corporate aggregate and then what is corporate soul. So once you know this, even though you did not have the time to go through that question of situational, जहाँ पे पूछा था एक situation दी थी और पूछा था corporation aggregate है कि soul, at least you would be able to attempt the question, right? Because you know कि ये topic के अंदर क्या है. Otherwise you would just probably use your, मतलब नहीं अगर पता होगा तो at the most you would just, even then you can solve it, you can just, मतलब कॉमन सेंस के अकॉर्डिंग सोल मतलब कम ये हो गए कॉर्पोरेशन एग्रीगेट, दैट इज व्हाट जनरल यू वुड ट्राई टू अप्लाई. But rather than doing that, it is always easier to just have gone through the topic once while you are attempting the 2 markers. फिर ये uses and advantages of incorporation. So again, because we have come here for a 2 marker, we probably don't have the time to read the entire thing. What we would do, the same what we did for valid essentials of a custom. We can just go through कि भाई ये first line जो है ये मुझे बता देगा कि भाई main advantage क्या है. When a large number of individuals have a common interest vested in them and therefore have to act in common in the management and protection of such interest, incorporation serves a useful purpose. तो ये एक purpose पता चल गया. So even though we don't have the time to go through 7, at least 4. I am saying wherever you come across these questions, essentials हो गया, uses, advantages हो गया, at least go through 4 pointers, 1, 2, 3, whatever you find easy. Maybe first वो ज्यादा लंबे लग रहे हैं, ये last वाला सिर्फ एक ही line है. Even if you have just read this, a body corporate can sue and be sued in its own name. ठीक है, सिर्फ ये भी पढ़ लिया और अगर ये question आया and you were not able to go through it for a 12 marker, you can attempt this and then you can elaborate. It's very easy to then just elaborate on one line rather than inventing something on your own, which would be very evident कि भाई ये बना बनाया लग रहा है. Even if one line is there from the actual correct thing, and then you are sort of increasing the length by adding an illustration, or you are just sort of a body corporate का नहीं आ रहा है तो corporate का definition दे दिया, क्या होता है example दे दिया. That for example, Google is a corporate aggregate or whatever examples you come ahead in your this thing textbook. So all of that would be an additional this thing to just increase your length. But जो first line होता है, that should always be what is correct. I would suggest that would be ideal. Even though it's only one line, at least you have gone through 4 parts of this, so we know कि okay चलो अगर advantages of incorporation पूछा है, we went through first this thing, then we read another line which is independent corporate existence is one of the most important advantages of incorporation. तो ये जो word है इसको underline कर दिया, independent corporate existence. This was second advantage. Then this looks long, forget it. This also looks long, forget it. Now this another ये तब यहाँ पे short point आया, go through this because you are only solving 2 markers so far, right? So then you can just read this. Being a legal person is capable of owning, enjoying and disposing of property on its own name. It is also easy to remember. So you can pick and choose कि क्या पढ़ना है, but minimum ideally at least go through 4 points of the topic. Then liability of corporation, this is also important, but now since we had come here for 2 marker, for now we can just say कि चलो अभी के लिए आगे बढ़ जाते हैं. Theories of corporation important. You at least ये ना देखो, at least ये पता होना चाहिए. Now for instance, if your question is realistic theory, or it is bracket theory, चलो bracket theory is more common. So if you do not know कि भाई ये corporation के अंदर आता है, how much can you how much can you even make up, right? You क्या मतलब bracket theory से अगर कहीं कुछ नहीं पढ़ा है, what is going to come in your mind? You are not even going to be able to make up things because you don't know where this topic is coming under. So if you had gone through it while solving your 2 marker of corporation कि भाई इसमें 3 theories है और ये 3 theories है, at least one line अगर ये 2 marker में आ गया समझो bracket theory, ठीक है? So at least one line you can add if you do not know anything, and if there are no other options left, at least इतना तो डाल सकते हो कि legal personality of a corporation के अंदर ही one of the theories है. That itself would be a good enough thing कि at least half mark 1 mark कुछ तो मतलब bare minimum, because if you do not know कि ये इसके अंदर आ रहा है, what are you going to make up, right? So then now once you have gone through it, you would कि ठीक है चलो ये past year paper में अगर पूछा था, you have gone through the we are following with the assumption that we have gone gone through the past year papers one, we have gone through the Jhabwala ones roughly. ठीक है, पता है कौन सी चीज कहाँ पे है. So now because maybe this was there in a past year papers, you can decide. See, आ गया bracket theory 2 marks में ही आ गया. This was asked in 2011. It probably must have been asked even more recently. यहाँ पे नहीं update किया होगा. So whatever the case may be, because you had come here for the 2 marker, you read this. Symbol theory was developed by Jering. ये इतना सा अगर सिर्फ इतना भी याद होना कि ये इसका है, दिस इज अ वेरी एडिशनल दिस थिंग, बिकॉज दिस मेक्स यू लुक लाइक कि भाई इसने पढ़ा है. अदरवाइज हाउ वुड यू नो कि ब्रैकेट थ्योरी वाज डेवलप्ड बाय जेरिंग. इन केस दिस क्वेश्चन कम्स नाउ, वी विल रिमेंबर दैट इट वाज डेवलप्ड बाय जेरिंग. इवन आई एम रीडिंग इट फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम. देन नाउ ये फिक्टिशियस थ्योरी कैन, यू कैन बेसिकली, द थ्योरी इज क्वाइट सिमिलर टू ये. अगर ये 2 मार्कर में आ गया, ठीक है, एंड इफ वी हैड जस्ट रेड ओनली दिस, फिक्टिशियस थ्योरी से सिमिलर है, अगर ये भी एक सेंटेंस डाल दिया, आई फील इट इज इनफ. इफ यू डू नॉट नो एनीथिंग एल्स अबाउट दिस थ्योरी, इफ यू नो कि भाई इसको किसने डेवलप किया है और किससे सिमिलर है, obviously the better this thing would be. ये वाला, ये जो पार्ट है, this would be the proper answer. But because we have come here only for like browsing through it, at least इतना तो पढ़ के आगे बढ़ सकते हैं, right? This much we have known. तो इसमें फिर then whatever you can basically उसके बाद जो भी ऐड कर लो कि भाई इसके अंदर थ्योरी था, इसके अंदर ये है वो है, which you would also solve when you're solving your 5 markers, right? So ये हो गया डबल कैपेसिटी, डबल पर्सनालिटी. दिस इज अगेन इम्पोर्टेंट. ये सिचुएशनल में आया था, लोअर एनिमल्स whether they have rights or not. So ये according to this definition was important, that they are merely things, often the objects of legal rights and duties, but never the subjects of legal rights and duties. ये एक sentence भी काफी important है, because this will help you to solve the situations, because honestly we did not have this Roman number while we were attempting the paper due to COVID. So I was also sort of, when I went through the situations without going through the textbook, even I was thinking कि भाई like because there are so many, because obviously कि भाई ये legal person तो नहीं है animal, but again you have your acts which prevent cruelty against the animals or which protect certain rights. ठीक है, so the way to answer that situation would have been this, कि you give the definition of salmon. अगर नहीं भी पता कि भाई इसने सालमन में दिया, you can always at least remember कि the lower animals are merely things, often the objects and the objects of legal rights and duties, but not the subjects of such rights. So वो exception में आ जाएगा कि they are the objects, because I had read it somewhere, according to the theory what they had said is कि even when we are sort of like having acts and legislations for the animals, in the end it is for protecting the interests of the society at large. So sort of like it went on the other direction. So just to know a few things, you would at least be able to write 3 lines for a 3 marker part of the situation, which would be enough to like just कि ठीक है attempt तो किया, ऐसा नहीं था कि कुछ भी नहीं आया. Unborn person, again very important. These सब I think you have also learned all this in transfer of property. Unless it's there in the, I don't remember which semester it was there, but these are few common topics. This you would know कि भाई unborn persons का क्या right है, whether they have legal personality or no. So this might come in a 12 marker कि ये सारे जो भी ये है, legal status of unborn person, dead man, animals, or it can come in a situation which has come for animals, this has come. So all of this we are just browsing through कि ठीक है dead, इतना ही बस सी. अगर मैं 2 markers के लिए if I'd come here, I would just see कि lower animals का क्या status है. I'm not reading everything. I went through the unborn person, contingent and qualified kind of legal personality है, इतना पढ़ के आगे बढ़ गए. Dead man, things and not persons. So at least conceptually कि yes or no, because situations a lot of times they will ask you yes, no and justify. So at least you should know कि इसका answer, like the one word answer, what is the one word answer for this. उसके बाद obviously you have come till semester 8, you can make things up. I am confident about that. So at least like important things you've just gone through, concept clear हो गया कि भाई dead person का क्या status है, unborn person ka kya status and all of that. So this 2 important topics you just covered while going through your past year papers. 3 questions, right? 3 question mein you have already gone through 3 chapters, if I may say so. Similarly, like this is so otherwise, like see, rather than going through everything in the same manner, I was saying that this is the same format which you have to follow for solve, like understanding how to study for the paper. Similarly, ab jaise ye justum generis aaya, I'll just go for this question, because for this you will find a lot of important topics which are there. See, हाँ, so now this is important. What had happened is, no, Latin maxim, I think इसमें rule of ये दिया हुआ है, and this is the Latin maxim. So a lot of times what happens, if you do not know कि भाई इसी का meaning ये है, then you probably might miss out on marks just because you did not, because you know it justum generis, but because this question had come and you do not know कि भाई ये इसी के अंदर आ रहा है, you might not be able to attempt the question. So now when we came across a justum generis as a 2 marker, I'm not going to just directly start over here. I'm going to go ahead and see कि ये start ही कौन से topic के अंदर आ रहा है. So for instance, we interpretation of statutes के अंदर आ रहा है. Okay, very interesting topic, and I would say ये तो read कर ही लो, because if not now, iOS is a subject for your semester. In your last year, iOS is there, right? Semester 9 or semester 5 if you are the 3-year LLB student. So go through this once, because this will help you. If like अभी तो आएगा, because C2 2015 तक ही इतने सारे questions आ गए. All of this is there even in your future this thing, and it's a compulsory paper. So ये mischief rule हो गया. All of this is something which will help you now also, and the understanding of it will remain. That's one thing which you can take ahead. So interpretation of statutes हो गया. So now because we were finding the answer for justum generis, we came across this topic. So as I said, we won't directly jump to the question. We would see कि भाई ये किसके अंदर आया. ठीक है, इतना तो मैंने देख लिया इंटरप्रिटेशन ऑफ स्टैट्यूट्स के अंदर. लेट्स जस्ट गो एंड सी कि मेन टॉपिक क्या था इसका. मेरिट्स ऑफ लेजिस्लेशन. सो यहाँ पे आ जाएगा टॉपिक लेजिस्लेशन एंड इंटरप्रिटेशन. Now this is the broad topic which you will browse through when you are coming to understand this concept. So let us start with this only. So interpretation हो गया. One of the definitions you have read through enough. Kinds of interpretation में सिर्फ इतना पढ़ के आगे बढ़ सकते हैं. Interpretation can be literal or functional. ठीक है, this much we have read and we are going ahead because we have come here for a 2 marker. Unless कुछ यहाँ पे interesting case law दिख जाए and you feel कि चलो ये पढ़ लेते हैं, जैसे ये important कुछ दिखा, penal statutes must however always be strictly construed. This is there in iOS properly, but ये this is one thing which you have just gone through. ये याद रखना is enough कि strict construction क्यों होता है penal statutes का. So at least you would know कि होता है, इतना तो पता है होता है, then you can just justify according to your own this thing, whatever knowledge you have at that point. Mischief rule हो गया. So now because I've come for a justum generis, I'm not stopping there. I'm saying कि चलो ये नया कुछ दिख रहा है, essential legis. Now again as I said, Latin words में problem क्या होता है पता है? It's not the case कि तुमको आंसर नहीं पता होगा और या उस सब्जेक्ट के बारे में नॉलेज नहीं होगी. फॉर इंस्टेंस अगर क्वेश्चन होता इंटेंशन ऑफ द लेजिस्लेचर, ठीक है, अब इंटेंशन ऑफ द लेजिस्लेचर, so you know कि ओके इसको like you know this comes under iOS, it comes under interpretation, यहाँ पे कोर्ट्स और जजमेंट ये सारी चीजें आने वाली है. And obviously where does intention of the legislature is important while interpreting the same law by the court similarly, right? So it's not the case that you don't know what this part is, but you might not know sentia legis is what the translation suggests. So if only this thing comes कि what is sentia legis, you might just be कि भाई ये नहीं पता क्या है, but then maybe after the paper like अच्छा ये था. So to avoid that from happening, always better to browse through and mark these things कि चलो ये translation दिया है, इसको at least याद रखना है कि ये है. So this is one thing from the mischief rule. We just read this, we moved ahead. कि चलो mischief rule बाद में short note के लिए तो आएगा ही, we will go ahead and we read it later. That is what I'm not saying कि we will do it later. I am saying this is how you are studying. If I am a student, this is how I am studying and how I am browsing through Jhabwala to understand कि portion और syllabus कैसे cover करना है, ठीक है. So now because I had come here for a 2 marker which was not even this topic, right, वो आगे आके आ रहा है, ये सिर्फ broad topic के ऊपर हम लोग गए, तो यहाँ से I only found कि this is important and let us at least just go through this case. And sentia, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, the translation is intention of the legislature. इतना पता हो गया तो at least कुछ अगर ये question आ गया, इसका translation आ गया, then you can definitely make up things on your own. That I am sure you have been doing so far. So इतना पता चल गया, at least ऐसा नहीं होगा कि attempt नहीं किया. Now logical interpretation. So again, see यहाँ पे एक और word आ गया, litera legis. Now what does this mean? Such interpretation becomes literal. इतना ही उसका meaning है. ये तो चलो ये तो word देखकर भी समझ में आ जाता है. It means literal legislation or literal interpretation. So at least you know कि चलो ordinary. So ये इसके अंदर ऐसे सी. Now don't study in such a ऊपर का manner कि you are reading the wrong things. It's not the case कि हर first sentence उसी topic का होगा. Ordinarily such this is little See, now for example, this paragraph. If I am just without using my mind, if I'm just saying कि चलो सर first sentence पढ़ लो, तो वो भी गलत हो जाएगा. Why? Because what it says, ordinarily the judge must accept the language in which a rule of law is framed, that is literal. Like such interpretation becomes literal. By this method, the court arrives at the correct conclusion with regard to the intention of the legislature. But if it is not possible to find out the intention of the legislature because of some logical defect, then it must be interpreted by some other means. It is then for the judge to supply an intelligent interpretation in order to furnish what is lacking in the law. This can be termed as logical interpretation. So if you are not using your mind and just reading the first sentence of each paragraph, what is going to happen is you are just going to say logical interpretation में ये होता है कि जज को जो भी लैंग्वेज दिया है रूल ऑफ लॉ को उसको एक्सेप्ट कर देना चाहिए, उसका मीनिंग है लिटरल एजेस. रॉन्ग. सो दैट इज व्हाई व्हेन यू आर गोइंग थ्रू द टॉपिक एटलीस्ट थोड़ा सा सी यहाँ पे व्हाई डिड आई स्टॉप, बिकॉज मुझे यहाँ पे दिखा कि ये बट दिया हुआ है यहाँ पे, बट इफ इट इज नॉट पॉसिबल एंड नॉट इज बेसिकली इन इटैलिक्स. सो दिस इज हाउ यू स्टॉप्ड एंड अंडरस्टूड कि ठीक है. अब यहाँ पे क्या हो गया, दो चीजें. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, because you read this, now you also know what is literal interpretation. You know a legal Latin maxim which is in relation to literal interpretation, and now you also know what logical interpretation is. So it is basically helping you either ways. Logical interpretation आया तो भी पता चल गया, literal interpretation आया तो भी पता चल गया. Now again, इतना टाइम नहीं है ये सारा पढ़े, तो we went ahead and we were like okay, now we came and we saw कि ये हमारा टॉपिक था जिसकी वजह से we had come to this topic. So you read this properly because you have to be able to formulate a 2 marker. अब ऐसा नहीं है कि just because you saw the topic you browse through it and went. At least make sure you have a proper 2 marker in your head. If this question comes a justum generis, at least 2 sentences, not 2 lines, not 1 2 sentences तो तुमको पता है which you can attempt for this question. So when you're solving your 2 markers, बेसिक इंटेंशन क्या है कि 2 मार्कर्स तो अच्छे से आ ही जाने चाहिए. अगर ये क्वेश्चन आया 2 मार्कर्स में, व्हाट इज कस्टम, व्हाट इज ओनरशिप, आई शुड बी एबल टू अटेम्प्ट इट इन अ प्रॉपर एग्जॉस्टिव मैनर. एट द सेम टाइम आई शुड आल्सो बी एबल टू मेक अप फ्यू थिंग्स फॉर माय 5 मार्कर्स एंड 12 मार्कर्स, or at least be knowledgeable enough to come back to this page if this question pops up in a 5 marker, right? So that is your intention while solving the 2 markers. तो ऐसा नहीं होगा कि ये 2 markers करते करते you are just browsing through everything and you have not gone through your 2 marker. So that is why justum generis जैसे हो गया, you have just gone through this, then you read it according to a 2 marker. Understand कि ये Latin maxim है, इसका translation हो गया. Understand that this Latin maxim, when this comes, we are talking about the rule of ejusdem generis. तो अगर चलो ejusdem generis भी आ गया, ठीक है, जो भी है, judged by the company it keeps. So in this 2 marker also, if you mention this, because ये 5 mark में भी आया है if I'm not wrong, so if you mention this also looks good for a 2 marker, that you know the Latin maxim which is being followed for the rule of ejusdem generis. Similarly for a 5 marker तो ये डाल ही दो, 5 marker 12 marker you should be able to correlate these 2 things. अगर ये पूछा है तो ये डालो, ये पूछा है तो ये डालो. It makes you look like कि भाई तुमने पढ़ा है कोई चीज. Similarly when you went for this ejusdem generis, don't forget to read the things which are given above and below. So now this expressio unius exclusio algeris. Now at least I wouldn't understand the meaning if I don't read it here. So that is why it is important if you've come across one maxim और उसी के साथ है. A lot of times, you know what used to happen, this has happened for our sociology paper. If you see the past year papers ka trend, what used to happen is the questions were not repeating at all. So just one, like we were just discussing, I was just discussing it with my friend कि सही में मतलब जो भी ये, when we used to make a question bank that these are the repetitive questions, there was no question which was actually getting repeated that often. So in that semester what I had done is I had just gone through. So for instance जैसे कि ये पूछा था, ठीक है, और ये टॉपिक नहीं पूछा है अभी तक कोई भी पास्ट ईयर पेपर्स में. So what I had done is ये तो I had just gone through, but I had separately prepared for these topics which were not asked earlier, because that was the trend of that sociology paper कि जो भी पूछा है अब तक वो रिपीट ही नहीं हो रहा है. So for instance अगर school of jurisprudence था, I'm just correlating it to sociology, not to your jurisprudence paper. 4 schools were asked so far, and there were 2-3 schools which have not been asked so far. So what I thought कि ठीक है चलो ये पूछा गया है और ये repeat ही नहीं हो रहा है. So I had gone ahead and I had prepared for those answers which have not been asked, and trust me, that helped me a lot. There was not a single question which I could have attempted. No, there was not a single question I had left because I had solved those additional questions which were not there in past year papers. So ऐसा नहीं है कि you can just follow a straight jacket formula कि ये है तो बस यही पढ़ो. You have to see the trend of your past year papers, and that is one thing which had helped a lot because there were very few things. It's not कि पूरा ही textbook cover हो गया था. It was just कि जैसे कि schools में 3-4 schools पूछी थी, 1-2 नहीं पूछी गई थी. So rather than leaving those, I had attempted those. I had like read through those, and then I had attempted the paper that way. So 2 markers में especially because we did not have any options, that was something which helped a lot because that was the trend of that paper, right? Because sociology paper again is not set by your LLB professor, it is set by normal sociology teachers which come and teach you. So in just explaining that कि ये पढ़ा तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि ये इसको छोड़ के आगे बढ़ जाओ. Read this, at least know what does this mean. Maxim means that when one thing is specifically mentioned, it implies that other similar things are excluded by implication. इतना बस पढ़ के आगे बढ़ सकते हैं. That is enough. If you know this much, you add illustrations later, you add more examples to your answer, that is enough. At least know the meaning of what this means. The principles of interpretation, again, as I told you, if we are preparing a 2 marker, at least exceptions या जो भी है 2 exceptions है, 2 ही exceptions है तो इतना तो पढ़ ही सकते that you know 2 exceptions are what. First exception is where the letter of the law is logically defective. So now logical defects may be of 3 kinds. ठीक है. So now at least 3 things which we have learned from this is what. एक तो literal ordinary cases में literal interpretation is the rule. ठीक है. ये एक important line है. Litera legis we had already studied earlier, so again that is helping. Sensual legis also we had studied, so again that is helping over here. फिर यहाँ पे you have to see कि format क्या है. 2 exception दिए हैं तो यहाँ पे ये first exception हो गया, ये पढ़ लिया, second exception पढ़ लिया. If you have enough time, go through these 3 points which are also going to help you somewhere or the other. Okay, logical defects क्या है? This is what this first exception is telling you. So rather than reading the entire thing, at least read कि ambiguity इसमें आता है, inconsistency इसमें आता है और incompleteness इसमें आता है. That is enough when you are attempting a 2 marker. So that is what exactly I was trying to tell you, how to use these questions to sort of like find your way out कि कैसे इसको solve करना है. So I think other papers you can sort of like attempt from your end. It's going to be the same thing. Quickly, let's just go through the time allocation. So now this is what the general question papers are, and we are going to follow the same format to understand the other topics. That is what you can do with your past year papers. Ideally 5 past year papers, so that's going to be 10 papers. If not that, at least 3 past year papers, that is going to be 6 papers, including KT. Now, this is the ideal length of answers according to me. For 2 markers, 2 to 3 sentences, not lines. At least have an entire complete sentence, minimum 2 sentences because it's for 2 marks. Then 5 markers, 1.5 to 2 sides. And the reason, see, this was our 2 sides used to be on the upper hand because we had a lot of questions to attempt in our 100-mark paper. For you, you have 2 hours, but you have very limited answers which you would be writing for long questions. Just 5 markers bhi 2 hi hai, situationals bhi 2 hi hai, 12 markers also 2. So I would say a teacher who is checking this sort of paper pattern would expect a little more on content, and especially from a subject which is very theoretical, like jurisprudence. So try for 1.5 to 2 sides. 12 markers, 3.5 to 4 sides because you're only attempting 2 of these. So that is a general length. Obviously, according to each question, it might differ. There might be some questions जिसमें content है ही नहीं उतना. So for that, obviously, it is understood whatever content is there, you're going to stick to that. But if there's a lot of content, you can boil it down to 3.5 to 4 sides. And situational is going to be as per question. Solve additional if time permits. Always justify your answers. Okay, so now situationals mein, it is, I would say why it is important to solve at least one additional question, because a lot of times you might be thinking one thing and you have attempted the question, but due to the format of the question, what happens is it's usually in the form of yes or no, and then you go ahead and you justify. So agar tumhara first part hi galat ho gaya, yes ya no, and you have justified, so that entire thing goes away. So it is always better to have one addition, even if you have just attempted it half-heartedly, that is fine. Jitna time bacha 5 minutes, 2 minutes, just answer it yes, no wala at least answer karke, then leave it, leave that question and go ahead. And always justify your answer, because sometimes what happens is there sometimes there might not be a right or wrong, but there might be like similar this thing ki yes no mein jo bhi hai, but if you are able to justify it, that examiner might take it into consideration. So don't leave it just at yes or no. Even if they are not asking for additional information, always justify your answer in a situation why you are saying yes, why you are saying no, whatever the case may be. And lastly, time allocation, 2 markers ke liye, this is very rough. This is what I feel should be followed owing to your paper pattern, because 2 markers hai. So even if you are giving like maybe 5 minutes to 4 to 5 minutes for each question, you can solve it in 25 minutes easily, because there are only 6 2 markers. 5 markers may 10 minutes each 5 marker is enough. 12 markers may I have like basically what I have done is 45 minutes, 20 minutes for each this thing, and 5 minutes to. So basically what I used to do for my 12 markers is, because we had to attempt 4 out of 6, it used to be very lengthy. So what we used to do is, rather than a lot of time used to be an issue. So rather than not rather than solving 2 questions very well and not being able to solve the other 2, what I used to do is I would at least fill in 2 pages. Like I used to leave 4 sides and I used to fill in 2 pages of each answer. फिर लास्ट में जितना टाइम बचता था, I would just continue filling it, फिर जितना भी हो सके, at least 2 sides, not pages, 2 sides of each answer is there, and then how much ever time you have, you can just go and fill in your answers. So for your paper, it should not happen that way, because you only have 12 markers, so you can spend 20 minutes on each, and 5 minutes you can just leave on to add few additional information. You can underline the important points, not highlight, basically you can just make pointers or whatever to make these answers look more structured, because your lengthy answers hote hain, if there is a structure to it, that would help the examiner to check it better. Then situational 20 minutes, you have 2 questions, 10 minutes each is fine, and then you, after all of this is done, you would be left with 10 minutes, which is like basically enough to sort of like recheck. Or if you have left some questions ke one side lik diya hai, agar time bacha, I would come back and write to it. So that much you can do for your like last 10 minutes which are remaining. So that was it.
Nimra, I wanted to ask you, does impression matter? I mean, of course the examiner doesn't have so much time, right? So if I go through the one-liners and I feel that many I don't know, so should I attempt that later, or be it any part? It's my choice that sequentially I don't want to go, and there are like I flip. So can I attempt the ones that I'm very confident about? Will that?
So are we talking about Roman numbers ka
Yes,
rearrangement,
yes,
or
yes.
no? So I would suggest don't do that. What you can do, see how a lot of times I have tried this is one of the papers, did not work for me, but it was still a better format rather than rearranging your Roman numbers. What I used to do is, if I know that for my 10, because we had 10 questions in 2 markers, I knew I would at least require 2 to 3 sites for this. I would leave that site. I would basically like it's very easy to demarcate your pages accordingly, because कि 5 marker में 2 sides से ज़्यादा नहीं लगेगा. And if I know I have to attempt 4 questions of the short notes, I know 8 sides would be needed. So rather than solving, even though I am solving the 12 markers first, but I am solving on the page where it would ideally be if you solve it 1 2 3 4. So rather you can just sort of make a skeleton in your paper कि ये 2 pages तो, and you can leave additional pages. There is no harm in leaving space, because obviously जितना neat रहेगा, that is better as compared to just sort of putting everything in a very untidy manner. So you can leave that much space, because यहाँ पे according to this paper pattern, there is even less answers you would be writing. The reason it is difficult is because for such less questions you have to study so much. That is the only difficult part. Other than that, you are writing less as compared to the 100-mark paper. So what you can do is you can just leave space for Roman number 1, and if you feel कि Roman number 2 पहले attempt करना है, go to that page wherein ideally the Roman number 2 would start, and then attempt the questions accordingly. Similarly, if you want to attempt the situational first, leave I think you have only 2 5 markers, so you can leave 4 sides and start your Roman number 3 from the 5th side. That would be better, because it's very like, if you see that they have to check so many papers, it would be a little like if there are jumbled questions, to go back and then to mark ulta, that would be a little inconvenient. So I would always say try to make it convenient for the person who's checking your paper. Not that they should give you marks on basis of that, but obviously when you have so many papers to check, it is one plus point if it is there in a very structured format, I feel.
Okay. And any tips for last minute preparations?
I think whatever you have, like when you solve these 2 markers and whatever we underlined, for example, Sentia legis was something which we underlined. Or if there was this thing, if I remember, bracket theory was by Jering, for example. This is one thing which I remember, which I've just gone through. So whatever we have underlined is what we felt was important when we went through the 2 markers. So the same thing you should stick to when you are revising your paper. Don't go through new things, because you might come across कि ठीक है, your friend is doing something new, you were like अच्छा ये तो मैंने नहीं किया, चलो ये करते हैं. Last minute में if you try anything new, you're going to forget whatever you have done for your own thing. And have this much faith that whatever you have, like whatever mind you have used to prepare for your paper, that is enough. So rather than trying new things, I would say stick to your existing things, and as I said, stick to your existing books. Don't go ahead and like एक नया guide मिल गया, या तो this is something which has come up कि okay मोकल में ये better दिया हुआ है. Don't like the last minute this thing. Whatever you want to do it now. Like 5 days before the paper is also fine. Do it, but one day before the paper, if you're trying something new, then that would lead to more confusion. And there is one more question by Surekha Das. It says, is it important to write synopsis before proceeding with the answer? Yes, it's not important, but as I said, it is convenient. So a lot of times, how this will help you. For instance, if you have just written the synopsis, okay, and you are not able to complete the answer, which is highly unlikely in your paper pattern because you only have 12 markers. So I would suggest starting se hi gandi writing se likho, but attempt everything. Earlier, what I used to do for my semester 1 and everything, I used to write my 2 markers very neatly, and by the time I used to come for my 12 markers, my handwriting was something which was barely readable. So then what I used to do is I used to start writing like in a very rough manner from the Roman number 1 itself, because there's less scope of your marks to be cut for those 2 markers as compared to your 12 markers which are looking untidy. So rather, like that is one thing. Start writing fast immediately. Don't stick to starting mein acha likh ke last mein not readable at all. And synopsis will help you how if you're not able to attempt one question entirely. Maybe as I said कि 2 side लिखकर आगे बढ़ गए, बाकी के 2 side लिखे, and then you're coming back in the remaining time just to fill in your paper. At that time, even if you are, for example, synopsis में 5 चीजें लिख लिए कि ये सारी चीजें are going to be included in my answer, what happens is एक तो थोड़ी length बढ़ गई answer की. Secondly, a person who is checking your paper, God forbid it's somebody who is not in the mood of reading your entire paper, but at least वो जो starting का आ गया, it gives the impression that you know what you have written. At least these are the important points. That is how you study also, right? Summary हो जाता है, and these synopsis what you are going to prepare for your exam will help you for your revision as well, because at that time, in like 1 hour before the paper, you might not have the time to go through all the 12 markers even if you've solved them. But synopsis is one thing which you can go through, and then later बैठ के आराम से you can just not make up stuff, but at least from your existing knowledge you can fill in those things. And if you are, God forbid, not able to complete the paper, at least it will leave an impression कि it's not the case, इसको आता नहीं था, इसने ये बताया क्या क्या होने वाला था, but it is incomplete. So rather than cutting more marks कि ये नहीं, at least ये सारी चीजें whatever is there in the synopsis, at least you're marked for that. So I feel it's better to write a synopsis rather than important. Thank you.